you've just been speaking on usability and design, and we were just talking about how good design can be elusive over prettiness.
Yes. Well, actually, on that subject, the idea of something that's easy to use already, but easier when it's better looking, more attractive, is something that I think is still new to a lot of people. Product designers are familiar with the concept, but interaction designers, interactive designers, anyone who designs with a screen isn't necessarily familiar with the fact that it actually makes a difference. There's this concept of the aesthetic usability principle. And it's actually, you can Google it and find out a whole lot more about the research that's gone into it, but basically proves that if all other things are equal, something that is easy to use but prettier is easier to interact with. We humans assume that it's easier to interact with because it's better looking, and we do this with humans as well. It's why prettier people are easier to interact with and have an easier time with social interaction. And we see it all the time with products, with cars. Cars do the same thing. They've got 4 wheels and steering wheel and gears and usually windows, locks on the doors, and they'll get you from point A to point B, but we all want the prettier car. And we think that the prettier car gives us a better driving experience. And that's one of the best comparisons, actually, to the idea of an experience with what we do in interaction design.
It's interesting. I was looking at signal versus noise yesterday, and they had a picture of a Jeep Wrangler's old 1980s, 1970s dashboard control with the speed and all the dials, and you're like, wow, that's actually just useful and easy to look at. You can understand immediately what you need to get out of it.
Yeah.
And then you can go way overboard with you can look pretty, but can be completely unintuitive to use.
Well, and that's the thing. Creating a cluttered interface, whether it's a virtual interface or a physical interface, isn't just a function of designers, visual designers. You can have a cluttered, ugly interface too. I mean, that's just poor planning and whether we call it feature creep or scope creep. I mean, it's the idea of thinking that by adding something and adding a lot of some things, we increase the value, and that's really not the case. Because every single feature that we add to something, whatever that something is, means that there's an entirely new set of things we have to account for as far as the ease of use is concerned. I wouldn't say that it's a directly exponential increase, but if we think about it in those terms, that it's not just a 1-to-1 ratio, that when you add one feature, it's now making it much harder to use, much more complicated rather, than it feels like it should be for just adding one thing. There's been a lot of research that's been done back to the 50s even on like the number of different decisions or items that we can kind of easily subconsciously decide between when we're making choices. Our brain can handle 7 plus or minus 2 is generally the rule that we follow. We talk about it in terms of navigation a lot of the time, and information architecture folks like to talk about it a lot. But really, it's any grouping and number of things that we give to someone to look at. If it's above that kind of range, that's 5 to 9 range, we have to think consciously about it, and it's at that point where it's no longer a subconscious thought process that something becomes harder to use and potentially more confusing. And so if we think that number is pretty small, 5 to 9, and that lower than 5 is still easier to use, each one that we add does add a lot of extra complexity.
So it's actually going back to 37 Signals, who are also massively into the design point. I was on Basecamp this morning after Ryan was talking about it yesterday, and they've got one button on their 37 Signals website when you get in there to click. They've got one main thing to go for. It's like, well, your decision, there's only one decision to go for. You click on it and go for that and put out the information.
Well, and that's something like where you were saying how if you've got an interface that you find some parts of are really straightforward and people seem to be able to make their decision fairly easily. And then you've got other parts of the same interface, whether it's web app or whatever it is, where people are getting confused. Usually the number of items they have to choose between to try and determine before they click on anything how to complete their task, that's what's at fault. It's surprisingly a major failing of designers, both visual designers, product or application designers. Anyone who's involved in the process is part of the design team. It's not just a visual thing. And it's amazing that we don't get that. It's when you hear about it or when it's pointed out to you, you think, oh, that makes sense. It's common sense. But the problem with common sense is that it's not so common.
Do you have any sort of concepts or what you're talking about? We're talking about a lot of people who work in building web apps always want more features. Everyone wants more features. Do you think there's a structure they can follow to sort of make sure that process is... Well,
and not that I want to come off as a 37 Signals fanboy, because I mean there are plenty of things that though I love their products and I use them, I don't love all of them and I don't use all of them, and it's for various reasons. But one thing that they get right most of the time is their insistence on not adding new features on a regular basis, and especially not adding features that people request, even if a lot of people request them. Their job, and it's the job of anyone who designs an application, is to be the gatekeepers of the quality and usability of that application, not the users. We have to assume that we might not know better than them. They might want something that the application doesn't do. But it's our job to determine if adding that feature will actually make it better, or will make it hard enough that we can't add it right away, because to add it and keep the usability where it should be, to keep it useful and easy to interact with, we need to reevaluate a lot of other things. And that's usually where we go wrong adding features, that we just add it. We don't do anything else. We don't adjust anything else to accommodate that addition. We just add something new. And if you add something new and you do that often enough without changing anything that's come before it, well, then what might have been a usable, useful application to start with is now a usable, useful application with a lot of stuff pasted on top of it. It's the difference between it's kind of the feature equivalent of a car bumper with a bunch of different stickers that are just keep getting layered on top of it, one after another. After a while, you don't recognize it as a car bumper anymore.
I think I've got a good example. What do you think about Facebook?
Facebook is an interesting example. I mean, I use Facebook a lot. I use it a lot, especially to keep in touch with my friends and family who are not typically online all the time. It works beautifully for that particular function and that purpose. What I don't like is all of the applications and all the other stuff that I don't use, and they're making it easier to ignore that now, which is great. I wasn't a total fan of the changes that they made to the design a few months back, but that didn't matter so much, because the fact that they removed a lot of the clutter of the noise of all those added on applications, everything that all these developers are building on the platform, made it okay. And I was okay with the changes to the layout and some of the things I didn't like as much, because overall it took away all the stuff that I didn't need to see.
Yeah.
So, and yet some people love the apps. I know people who spend. I have friends who all their time is spent on Facebook when they're online, and they don't work online. They have regular jobs, and they play all the games, and they are fully involved with things that are built on the platform. But I think you'd probably find that many of them have one or two games or add-ons Facebook apps that they like to use. They don't use all of them. They may install a lot, but then they uninstall them because they don't need them, they don't use them. Just like we do with applications on the desktop.
Yeah. Except with Facebook, it doesn't make it crash all the time.
Not yet.
Not yet. And where do you think the web design stuff's going? Because we've gone from really pretty awful web design to slightly better and slightly less mediocre. What's the next steps? Where do application developers and web developers need to start focusing their attentions?
Well, it's clearly already happening. A year and a half ago, I was speaking at future web apps in Miami and talking about the actual future of where these things were going to go. And the way I've always seen it since I started doing web design, I've been wanting the experience of everything on the web to be more like the more polished desktop apps. Even whether or not it was a web application, it's just the browser has always been a very it's kind of the Neanderthal of applications in general. It's just very, very simple, and even though it's progressed as far as it has, we still see that we've got things that we still have to work around, and it's why people are enjoying building apps for Air or using Flex, right? Because they've progressed much faster than the standard web browser.
Where do you think this is going? Because I mean, I was speaking to someone, I can't remember who it was, I think it was Mark audibly, saying that how applications now on online apps are getting so advanced that the browser is really not the place for them. Are we moving to like on desktop apps, or
I think I think and I hope that what we're moving towards is a removal of the distinction. And again, things like Air are helping a lot with that, where you're actually building something using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and it's really just running in WebKit. That's great. Personally, I would love to see like WebKit everywhere, and then we get rid of the browser interface itself, the concept of that, and we just build things and deliver them exactly the way we want them to. I think it'll make it better for the users.